it was about the end of fall and almost the beginning of winter. The time of the year where trees still showed a tad bit of color, a few leaves that barely hung on to the tree. The mornings were white from the cold frost that had covered the streets. Waking up consisted of feeling the radical differences between the temperature of which you're laying in, the temperature of the chilly room you dress up in, and the temperature of the frozen outside when you step out of the building. You could still see a little snow on the sidewalks that had not yet melted from the snowfall several days ago. I've spent a few winters now in the city, a city like none other, both of the good and bad things. You see, every large city, to me, is some sort of grand mechanical invention. Every person that lives in one performs his or her part of the mechanics to have the city up and moving. But not any more so, because then that would be caring too much. Each person goes on with his or her life, not giving too much thought who they pass on the street. Everyone works according to only his or her own needs, far worse even, wants. Rarely did people step out of their way to help someone else. Everyone goes his or her way, trying to not give any thought to other people's lives. This was a harsh reality of large cities that I never could become used to. The city in which I lived was not any different, perhaps even a bit more harsh than usual. Everything about it was harsh, especially the winters. The winter made people colder than they already were. And it's not that people here are more mean or more hostile. It's just that the people have become accustomed to such a rough way of life. The people of this city have been through the harshest of circumstances in the past. Throughout the centuries, the people of this city had become adapted to the environment and to the atmosphere. A harsh city for rough people, it was somewhat of a hopeless place. Hopeless in the sense that everything was neutral. Everything seemed blank and empty. The only thing that breathed life into the city was the history of the city and the aesthetically pleasing atmosphere to me. From the classical buildings, to the vintage lampposts, to the hand-laid road of bricks, to the local shops, and to the trees that created a beautiful scene in the backgrounds of the city's paintings. I enjoyed the scene the city had to offer. This was also the time that things were to be done quick and efficient. No one wanted to wait longer than they had to. I remember a week ago when I went to a local shop in the morning to buy the newspaper that barely came in, and the lady behind me got ridiculously impatient when just before I was about to pay, I asked if they sold Nat Shorman cigarettes. The 30 seconds that it took for the cashier to find and grab a pack was enough to anger the lady and almost create an unpleasant scene. I remember deciding to wake up early to go on a morning walk to think. It was refreshing waking up earlier, on purpose, and for the sake of just enjoying a walk. It was definitely frosty that one morning. I remember that I even almost slipped because the ground was so icy. The walk to work is very interesting and rewarding to my senses. Every block I walked through, I would notice how micro and adaptive our communities are. I mean, every block of buildings had their own type of atmosphere. One block was going through remodeling, and it was staged in a construction stage. You could see workers coming in tired and feeling that sort of feeling one feels when there is no other way. When you have to do what you have to do, so you get up and go to work, emotionless. But at least there. The next block would be a residential complex, where you could always see kids just being kids. You would have to watch out when driving though. Then in another block or so down the street, there is a park with a single, beautiful oak tree in the center. It is most definitely a scene to witness. The sight of the old oak tree still standing is a sort of remedy for myself. Adoring a little noises you hear while walking is a favorite of mine. The early chirping and whistling of the numerous but pretty birds is one of my favorite noises. The delicious smells from the various restaurants and food stores. It was on such morning walks when, perhaps, the most meaningful thoughts would come to mind, or important life decisions would pop up that begged to be brought in question. It was on such mornings when you felt most refreshed, sober, raw. You could see life and thoughts more clearly. The later daily problems of the world end up leaving one with a blurry, messy vision, distorting a sober approach to thought and ideas. Therefore, mornings end up being a precise moment for one to think and ponder. That was such a morning for me. Though still enjoying the various sights of the walk, I was thinking about my life. It's been a few years since I've moved to the city. I was remembering all the adventures prior to this city, remembering how I got here, remembering all the faces I've gotten to know here and call friends. I was also thinking of the present, where to go now, what to do now, and thinking a bit of the future. It's an interesting story actually, about how I got to the city and ended up living here. Initially, I was supposed to stay here no longer than for more than a year. My college friend Mark and I dropped out of college and committed to a life of travel and adventure. We developed a plan that would enable us to travel and explore new settings, yet still live decently with a source of income. Our plan was that we would move to one city, but only live long enough to familiarize ourselves with the culture, people, and environment of a certain city, and then within 1 year, move on to another city. We determined that we would need a job that we would like, that would enable us to earn enough money so that when combined we could be able to afford a decent place to stay at, that would be in demand in every large city, that would give us the opportunity to meet various types of people, but most especially creative people. Hence, we decided that such a job would be a barista. People love coffee, and there's coffee shops in every corner of every city. I also knew that coffee shops, third-wave coffee shops anyways, were the center of creativity. Coffee shops always had art hanging on the walls, live music nights on certain days of the week, various types of creative people working on projects, and so on. We, therefore, gained some experience about coffee and became baristas and set out on our journey. This city was the third city of our adventure, and alas, also the last. We didn't even live here for more than 3 months when Mark finally came to a realization of what he wanted to do, at least for the next few years. You see, Mark had grown up in a family of military men. His grandpa, various uncles, cousins, and brother. From a young age, he had wanted to become a medic in the army. Whether a 68 watts, 68 whiskey, as one would say, or a 18D, 18 delta, he disciplined himself to wake up each morning at 0400 military time, go on a run, and afterwards work out at the college. There was a few mornings where I would join him. Mark and I had become good friends over a period time. We didn't click or hit it off right away. I met him in middle school. It was the middle of my 8th grade year. I had just moved from California to Washington. One of the first friends I made was a good friend of Mark's. So we became acquainted, and even once in a while would be in the same social group. Over the next 2 years, we became a little closer because we shared a passion for sports and athleticism. We started playing tennis, basketball, and even a bit of calisthenics. One thing led to another, and we became good friends. A bit later, we both enrolled into the same college and even had a few classes together. The next quarter of studies, we tried register for the same classes. We had philosophy, English, mathematics, chemistry, anthropology, and some other classes together. It was at college where we became best of friends and ended up going on many adventures, such as hikes, trips to new cities, and various other traveling. On one hike, with our also good friend, we stripped down to our boxers and ran into the lake until we were fully submerged. I might add that it was 17 degrees Fahrenheit, or 3 degrees Celsius, quite cold, you can imagine. We had no towels, or blankets, or change of clothes. I bet we won't go into the water with just our boxers, Mark said. I could see that he was a bit surprised at himself for saying that. I guess it came up completely spontaneous. If one of you goes, I'll definitely go. Actually, heck, "I'll go right now," I said, trying to peer pressure them into actually going through with this. You see, we were all decided that it was time for him to stop living such a life and leave. Mark was an interesting person. He was insecure about himself and would subconsciously lie to me and others in order to create a certain image that he wanted society and people to see him as. He was impersonating someone he wasn't in all reality. For instance, he would always try to show others how much he loved adventure, risk, and adrenaline, but in reality it would take quite a bit of time for him to climb a certain mountain or walk astray from some hike that we were on. It's not that he wasn't adventurous or a risk-taker. It's just that he exaggerated and lied to create a much more lucrative identity of himself. I never quite understood the need to lie and exaggerate about who one was. Never could see how it actually helped one be who one was. I thought that such misconceptions of one's identity would only create a beautiful picture that was later to be distinguished as being a counterfeit and would make things worse. But I guess that's why he never committed or could become attached to people. Traveling made it easy for him to paint and sell a counterfeit of his life before it became known. We became friends because of our enthusiasm for our risk and for the excitement of the unknown. But it was our shared thoughts of cynicism and our shared view of realism that made us the friends we were. In college, I could never decide on a certain career. None was ever good enough. Mark was the same in that regard. He grew up always wanting to become a 68 whiskey, or commonly known as an army medic. But eventually, through my various attempts of showing him the world through a creative and adventurous life, he ended up traveling and exploring the world with me. But as the saying goes, all good things come to an end, and eventually Mark and I split our ways. It was on a Friday night, after a few beers, that Mark told me that he was tired of being the second. What I didn't know, though suspected, was that Mark was jealous of me. Apparently, quite jealous. He confessed to me that he didn't like that most adventures and our greatest of stories were initiated or had become a reality because of me. It was I that would initiate in conversation with people. It was I that networked our way to find us jobs at certain reputable coffee shops. It was I who the girls wanted the number of. It was I that wasn't afraid of being who I was. I think it was latter reason that truly got to him. It bothered him greatly that being real, honest, and not afraid to be one's true self was that truly mattered in this world. Because in all reality, Mark cared for the people that became close to him. He became too attached to the various places and faces. But for some reason, he thought that being that person made him weak and pitiful. He didn't want people to discover that counterfeit picture that he had painted. So instead of letting people, he'd just simply move on to another place. It was convenient for him to do so. I ended up deciding to stay a little longer and meet a bit more people. In that while longer, I became friends with a couple that was opening up a second location for a creative form, Oliver and Noel. They went through some of my various pieces of work, some old writings, photography, and design projects, and invited me to work as a copywriter for them. I've always wanted to work in an environment of creatives, and hence decided to take the job, perhaps even make a career out of this. Oliver and Noel were a lovely couple. They complemented each other well. They were the very hip, extroverted, and outgoing couple. They would always travel to various beautiful places, be up to date on the latest fad, and consistently try new experiences. Through the span of several years, they went from working with each other on projects, getting in a relationship, and finally to being married. He was a successful photographer, and she a great designer. After a few years of occasionally working together, they decided to open up a creative firm focusing on brand identity. And after a few more years, they started working with more companies and on diverse projects, which led to needing a second office with a little different focus, primarily focused on advertising. Hence, they invited me to work as a copywriter at their new ad agency office. It's now been a little over a year since I started working as a copywriter. I love the experience of working with many young and talented minds, such as me. It was the main question on my head while walking that morning. A few months ago, during a global project that required me to work in a different city, I was offered a job. It was to pay much more, enabled me to work with much grander companies, and provided an opportunity to work at another city that I've always wanted to travel to. At that moment, I didn't give it too much thought and declined the offer, but more and more recently, I was contemplating on whether it was time to move on in my adventure. I love this city, for it was beautiful and by far the greatest of the cities I've visited to date. But I was becoming more and more tired of the mundane life I was living. Don't get me wrong, I loved my job, the people, and the projects. I was just getting tired of the daily flow of life, very much the same and too much of a routine. I guess I was in need of some change in my life. I still hadn't made the decision yet, just thinking while walking. I usually made a stop at the local coffee roastery, and this was a morning that was no different. The coffee shop, Greybeard Coffee, was the closest coffee shop around that served properly made coffee. Much of my time was spent here, probably even more than I spent in my apartment, excluding sleeping. There was something about working at home that didn't feel right to me. I needed a certain vibe, an atmosphere, to create and design. And Greybeard was one of such places. There was something about people making small talk, the shuffling of newspapers, the old and classic smell of tobacco in the air, the various types of people that came to the shop, the irritatingly loud sound of the steaming wand, and the music that was casually playing in the background. Coffee is a background of all good things. Coffee was that instrument that was always playing in the background of our lives. Think about it. Coffee shops are the go-to on first dates. When the awkward pause hits, you take a sip of the latte while thinking of something else to say or ask. Coffee is the remedy in the mornings, after the various sleepless nights. Coffee is there while your friends fell asleep on you during a trip across the country. Coffee is the smile on a sad day, the treat on an accomplished day, and the confidence boost on a low day. Come to think of it, coffee was present when I was first introduced into the creative world by my creative cousin and friend, Finn. He not only introduced me to art, music, photography, and culture, but he also introduced my present self to my past self. He showed me a different perspective of this world, one which I could relate to and identify with. One day, we made a pit stop at a coffee roastery, and it was there that I, for the first time, enjoyed truly good coffee. Finn definitely influenced me a lot. He showed me a life worth living, and that it was possible to not succumb to the world and its ridiculous standards. He was the closest person that anyone has come to as being my mentor. And am I glad for that? Coffee shops are also a place where many people of different likes go to. For instance, the elderly, cute couple who comes each morning to enjoy their drip coffee while reading the newspaper. Or the businessman waiting impatiently for his caramel macchiato with extra whipped cream. Coffee shops host concerts, art shows, and various other community events. Coffee shops are tiny second homes to the many of us. I guess the experiences where coffee was present meant a great deal to me, and so here I was at Greybeard, ordering the usual, a cortado and a glass of sparkling water. There was something about the cortado that made it become my daily coffee drink. Most likely it was the balanced ratio of milk and espresso that made the drink a favorite of mine. I would occasionally have a mocha or a vanilla latte on days when I had a sweet tooth. I guess that being in an atmosphere where coffee was present, I thought it would trigger the inspiration from all my adventures and creative life to get me going for whatever it was I was working on that day. I remember that morning that it was a bit more packed than usual. I assumed that it had something to do with another nearby coffee shop being closed down because local and third-wave coffee shops were running a mainstream, and coffee chain shops out of business. It was kind of a pleasing feeling to me. The fact that local and independent shops were slowly becoming more and more prominent. It showed to me that people were becoming a bit more knowledgeable about what it is that they are buying and who it is that they are buying from. Now, Greybeard didn't have the aesthetics of a coffee shop that I like the most. I preferred an interior of minimal design, with the use of neutral colors, especially black and white. However, Greybeard was designed appropriately to fit into the era of when this building was built, most likely the late 50s or early 60s. It had retro, wooden window frames that looked nice with the classical brick building. The inside had wooden, circular tables that weren't spread out efficiently in order to host a maximum amount of customers. But maybe that's what the owner or designer initially planned, to create a certain cozy setting instead of a soulless and blank scene. There were two places in the shop that I had become accustomed to sitting at. One was on a couch that was located between the wine shop right next door and the coffee shop. I like this place because it was far from all the usual shop noise, which I didn't always like. Sometimes it was a bit too loud for me to listen to my music. The thing I didn't like about this couch spot was that it was right next to door, and especially when it was cold, every time people would walk in, I would feel the cold air seep into the room and strike me without any sympathy. The other spot was in the corner of the room, also most distant from everyone. It was a table for two, which barely had room for my laptop, random books, various of my journals, and coffee. But I guess I like having that somewhat of a clutter. It made me feel cozy, as if I was at home. Luckily, though the shop was quite packed, and my corner table wasn't taken, so I made my way, settled my things down, and went to the bar to order the usual. It was at this time when I would look around the shop and observe the people that were there. It was interesting to analyze and observe people. Each was like a book. It was interesting that just like books, people can seem to be a certain type from the outside or the cover, but then completely surprise you when you get to know them personally. Sometimes I would create little stories about people that were there. Like, for instance, the elegantly dressed man in front of me. He was calm and very respectful. He seemed to be in no hurry at all, considerate of everyone and everything that was happening. He had on a three-piece suit. It was an old suit, one that he's had for many years. He was some sort of intellectual, probably a professor at the college not more than a few more blocks away. By his face, I can see that he's lived a troubled life, probably from when he was a child of a large but poor family. Yet here he was, successful and proud of who he had become. In his hands was the latest weekly issue of The Economist, so I figured perhaps he was an economics professor, probably here to read the newspaper, enjoy a macchiato, and be on with his way. It felt good to be right, because in just a minute he ordered a macchiato, and then I began thinking of the slim chance that I may have perfectly described his life. Though I knew it was almost near impossible to read a life as if it was some book you just pick out and read. Every person's life is intricate and special in the sense that no book can be written to tell a person's honest life story. There isn't enough time to write such a book, and even more so to read one. As I ordered the cortado, I talked with Valerie, one of the baristas, about the current weather. She then asked me why it's been taking so long since I had written something to my blog. It was satisfying to know that people were considerate enough to care at times. I told her that the reason I wasn't writing to the blog was because I was in the midst of a few projects, and that writing has becoming a bit of a distraction. But I promised her that I would have something within the week or two. Valerie was the sort of person that I could easily identify myself with. We obviously shared a similar appreciation for coffee, but there was more to that. I can't quite describe what it was that we shared, but I can say that I've rarely had this feeling, and it was only shared with a few other creative and artistic minds. I also liked her fashion sense. It was quite chic, and yet it showed a bit of her rebellious and young self. I could see myself in her. In her eyes, I could see the burden she carried along with her, which consisted of leaving family to pursue the life she was now living. It was all too familiar with me. For once I had to do the same. The cortado was precisely how it should have been, warm. The thing is, and I knew my coffee, milk cannot be too hot, as many customers like it to be. When the temperature of the milk is over a certain degree, the milk loses its sweetness and its prime taste. It is quite sad to see coffee shops that burn the milk for the sake of the customer that wants it hot so he or she can enjoy it at work after a 30-minute commute to work. Another reason why I adored Greybeard is that the baristas would explain to the customer why they didn't make the coffee too hot. They explained the reasoning behind this principle, and it was nice to see that the coffee craft wasn't being distorted for the sake of the customer and money. It wasn't any more different on any usual day, I thought to myself as I started answering emails that I should have done the night before, but last night, answering emails was the least of my worries. I was invited by a Stacy, a girl from another ad agency, for a night of some blistered shishito peppers. After dinner, we enjoyed some red, dry wine while listening to the new record player Stacy got as a present from one of her friends on her housewarming party. She didn't yet have a vast collection of records, but for Emma, forever ago was quite nice that evening. It was a pleasant night with a pleasant girl. I left around 10 o'clock, not wanting to overstay. I also thought of Stacy as really nice, and didn't want to ruin my chances with her for something more than a regular fling. It was then, after answering my emails, that I decided to write bit in my journal. I trained myself to write as much as possible at the age of 16, and since then didn't stop. I always thought that it was a lost art, and that by doing so, I was being different and continuing a legacy of various writers, creatives, philosophers, and just great men in general. It was a relaxing and honest way to talk to oneself and to see the situations from various perspectives. Writing is quite beautiful. And I'm talking about the type of writing in a real journal and with a real pencil or pen. I prefer a pencil so that I can then erase something if it's not in sync with the rest of my handwriting. It's interesting to write by hand. It takes patience and a lot of thought to do so. It's not like writing on a laptop, where you can easily type a lot and then just delete all of it and retype something complete else. When writing in a journal, you put more effort and more care to truly explain the thoughts rambling in the mind. Though it's still not an easy task. No easy task indeed. For how can one translate the infinite thoughts of one's mind onto a journal composed of only so much paper and with a finite amount of words? I remember writing a poem that day about how lovely the walk was and how grand and complicated life is amidst all its beauty and chaos. As I finished writing a poem, I also took a sip of the last of the cortado. The last sip is always the most bitter. I wonder if that's so because of all the grind that's always left on the bottom, or if it's because I know that there's no more left for me to drink after this sip. I sit and look around and decide that enjoying one more cortado wouldn't hurt too much, except that this time I'd go outside and enjoy a net shoreman while at it. I remember never understanding how elderly Italian men could smoke and drink so much coffee when I was young and naive. But now I was finally understanding their appreciation for coffee and the tobacco. It was quite a combination, especially when it's shivering cold outside, but the coffee is cozy and warm. As I sat on the bench and puffed out some smoke, I couldn't help but notice a woman walking across the street. The woman had on a modish coat with a scarf, topped off with a red beret, that actually went quite well altogether. What mostly caught my eye, however, was her blonde hair that was being tossed around by the wind, which she would keep trying to fix while walking so hastily somewhere. While being in such a hurry, she didn't see how she had dropped something from her satchel, a paper of some sort. Obviously, I ran across the street, picked it up, and tried to catch up to her, yet managed to lose the sight of her at turn of the street. I looked at what I was holding. It was an ad flyer for an art gallery that was supposed to be featured tonight at the Institute of Arts. It was a showcase of paintings done by various artists of their final year at the Institute. On the back of the paper was a phone number with no name. I thought to myself that perhaps this phone number is important to that Red Beret lady, and decided to attend the event later that evening. It was supposed to start at 8 o'clock and last till 10. As I went back to the cafe, I thought whether it was worth it. You see, I always considered myself a romantic realist, in the sense that I understood the difference between what life is and what it isn't. Life isn't a movie, or a book, or a dream. People have created various romantic lies that have been accepted by practically everyone in this world. We see the happy ending as the actual ending, thinking that it'll eventually get there, or that it'll eventually happen, that time is the only element at play. We get so lost in following and loving ourselves that we lose track of those around us. We focus so much on some grand picture that has been falsely created by ourselves that we forget the real little pictures that matter. In reality, life is not so pretty, it is rather harsh even. It is like a mixed bag of various emotions and feelings at many different times and places. However, life doesn't have to be so. Life can be beautiful, it can be enjoyed, and it can definitely be good. Heck, it's not even that it can be, it's that it should be. However, in order for life to be truly romantic, it must first be realistic, and only then can it be something more than that. For no king, no aristocrat, nor oligarch will let go of wealth for the sake of the people. That's history, that's proven. Change, reformation, and revolutions are merely illusions for one to believe and hope in something. No rich person can understand a poor person, nor can a person who hasn't loved understand the very idea of love. That's where the illusion is. We believe the ideas of love, happiness, peace, but that's it, nothing more. We're not actually happy, we don't truly love, nor do we have peace in the world. We merely love the ideas or the feelings of those things. Though I understand that the world I live in is such a place, it does not mean that it can't be different, that it cannot be all of those things. Therefore, I do what I can to contribute to the romantic's view of life, knowing that it is naive to even try. Though I didn't expect good from anyone, I tried to do as much of it as I can. For that is the difference between a romantic and realist. The romantic just dreams and hopes. The realist does that, except that the realist also acts and pursues that dream and hope.